Recording in progress.
Off you go.
So good evening, everyone. So the last time I did a presentation, I did it on what many historians of World War II consider the strangest battle of the war. And now we're going a bit earlier into the war, and we'll talk about what many historians also consider a very peculiar battle. As you can see on the screen, on one of the subtitles, it says how a colonel's choice saved Norway. And that choice was more of I will either be decorated or I will be court-martialed. So that was a very tough decision he had to make, but he did make it, and Norway exists today as we know it because of this man, Oberst Eriksson. So the Battle of Drøbak Sound took place in the Drøbak Sound in Norway, in the northernmost part of the outer Oslofjord. And it took place on the 9th of April 1940 and marked the end of the Phoney War and the beginning of the Western Front of World War II. As you can see on screen, it says the restrictions regarding the German Navy as specified in the Treaty of Versailles. So they had 6 battleships, 6 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. And that's the only navy they could have because of that treaty. However, after Germany officially rejected the Treaty of Versailles in the mid-1930s, the Kriegsmarine began developing the Admiral Hipper class. The Admiral Hipper class was a set of cruisers that would assist lead ships into combat and in the German Navy's goal for European domination. This development would mark the beginning of their comeback to military dominance in the area. On the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland on the left side, and the Soviets invaded Finland in late November 1939, and that's on the right. And they invaded Finland because it was formerly a member of the Russian Empire. Additionally, towards the end of 1939, Hitler came to the realization that Germany could potentially benefit from the strategic neutrality of the Nordic countries. As you can see, we have Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Denmark. And the reasoning for this was very simple. The majority of Germany's war supplies depended on the supply of iron ore from Sweden. Therefore, Germany relied heavily on Swedish iron ore to prepare for their invasion of France, as well as the campaign on the Western Front in the Nordic nations, if it did come to it, as well as in the Baltic states. And the next slide, we have a map of Norway and Sweden. And we have in the text being iron ore is extracted in Kiruna and Malmberget and brought by rail to the harbors of Luleå and Narvik, with Narvik being in Norway and Luleå being in Sweden. And from there, the ore was sent to Germany through the Baltic Sea from Luleå. But unfortunately, the town of Luleå received heavy snowfall during the months of December to April. And therefore, Germany could not rely on this singular route to supply iron ore. And the majority of iron ore supply happened through the Norwegian route. Additionally, France and Britain were well aware of that Germany highly depended on the supply of iron ore to be successful in the war. And here we have a map of Britain over here, Norway in this icy bit, Sweden over here, and Denmark right here. And this need for iron ore by Germany led to Britain heavily monitoring the ore being exported from Sweden, and they controlled the North Sea, which is the ocean in between these countries. And they guarded this North Sea with the Royal Navy Home Fleet. And Britain also pressured German shipping activity occurring in the North Sea through Operation Wilfred, which Britain launched as a way to instigate a German response in Norway. By January of 1940, Navy Chief Erich Raeder was convinced that Britain wanted to occupy Norway in order to completely block or delay all exports from the Norwegian-Swedish territory to Germany. Owing to this, the German High Command feared that Britain might violate Norwegian neutrality in order to mobilize its forces. Following this, Germany began to work on their next largest ship, the famous battleship Bismarck, one of the most formidable battleships of its day, just a few years after Admiral Hipper. On the 16th of February 1940, British naval forces captured the German tanker Altmark and sailed south of Stavanger in Jossenfeld. This ship was attacked by the British destroyer Cossack, and as a result of this attack, 8 German sailors were killed, and about 299 British sailors were rescued from the Altmark. This incident prompted Hitler and the German High Command to reconsider Norway's neutrality, and Norway could no longer maintain its neutral status, even if it wanted to. On the 21st of February 1940, the Führer ordered the German High Command to come up with a plan to invade Norway. This was called Operation Visirebom, and the main objective of this operation was to prevent the Allied forces from taking control of the Norwegian waters and Norway. The German High Command allocated 6 naval units for this operation and placed utmost importance to the capture of the capital city of Oslo. This was done through ambush attacks planned to occur simultaneously through sea and through air. In 1940, Norway was under a constitutional monarchy ruled under King Haakon VII, who continued to rule Norway after its independence in 1905. Hitler's strategy was to establish control over Scandinavian countries and to plant puppet states within these territories. And they would carry out Germany's orders. And this would allow Germany to seep through hierarchical cracks slowly but steadily and establish supremacy over the Scandinavian countries and position the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine up for success in the German war operations to the north. They planned to occupy all locations of strategic importance through amphibious landings backed by 6 groups of paratroopers. Between the 3rd and 7th of April, 3 groups of supply ships and tankers had departed from German ports. On the 8th of April, though, the warship named Group 5 was carrying around 2,000 personnel set sailing towards the north in an attempt to peacefully occupy Norwegian capital of Oslo amid good weather and cloudless skies. And on the same day, the opposing 2 forces set sail towards Bergen and Kristiansand. Since all the German ships that were involved in the operation were at sea, there was no way for them to return to the mainland. Meanwhile, Group 5 was advancing towards Oslo at the speed of 18 knots. It consisted of 2 German heavy cruisers, namely the Blücher in the front, and the Lutzlow, the light cruiser named Emden as you can see on the screen. And as well as behind these 3 ships were 3 torpedo boats and support ships. And at around 6:10 p.m., the fleet of ships were about 20 miles north of Skagen, and the Blucher was ahead in line, eastern with the other ships in the fleet. As the darkness of midnight draped over Norway, the German troops secretly entered the Norwegian territory without incident at first. Following this, the Norwegian auxiliary patrol boat named Paul III was patrolling the outer boundaries of the Oslo Fjord. This patrol boat fired a warning shot at the German troops, following which it approached a German torpedo boat named Albatross. At approximately 11:25 p.m., the Roe Ford searchlight spotted the German fleet. This led to a series of warning shots being fired from both sides. Taking advantage of the poor visibility conditions, the German troops were able to disappear from the view of the Norwegian forces. And let me just quickly see if I can bring up a pen or laser. So here is where the Battle of Drøbak Sound takes place. And here we have the fort of Norway that takes part in the battle. So the German ships were advancing into the Oslo Fjord. And this fjord was very narrow. And the first sign of the intrusion of unidentified ships into the outer region of the fjord was seen at around 11:30 p.m. from Karl Johansbøen in Horten over here. So they were starting to get in very close to Norway, to Oslo, that sits over here. So all they have to do now is get through here, since they've already entered over here. And the Horten fort sent a signal to Drøbak to announce that there was an unidentified ship and ships following it entering Norwegian territory. So here we have Oscaborg, which was the main defense in Drøbak. To gain complete control of the capital city of Oslo, the German troops had to successfully navigate through the main line of defenses at Oscaborg Fortress that I just mentioned. And this, unfortunately for the Germans, was the most dangerous point of this northbound trip to the capital, and that is the Drøbak Narrows. Let me just end the laser. And here are two modern pictures of the Oscaborg Fortress, which was located on the South Coleman Island at the center of the fjord, about 10 miles south of the capital, defending the Drøbak Narrows using 3 28-centimeter crop-made guns. These guns were operated manually and had no protective cover. 2 15-centimeter Oswig-based guns were also positioned on the east side of the fjord, north of the settlement of Drøbak. This provided Drøbak Narrows with a very powerful defense. On a dark and foggy night, Oberstbürger Eriksen, the garrison commander of Oscaborg, could deploy 3 28-centimeter cannons to repel a moving unknown target with just 2 sergeants and 23 young recruits. And on board the Blucher, Counter-Admiral Oskar Kumitz made the decision to enter the narrow space at around 3:30 a.m., just before the sun began to rise on the 9th of April. At around 3:40 a.m., 2 Norwegian auxiliary boats were patrolling the head of the narrows and were able to spot German ships entering the Vildvet. These auxiliaries were able to send news of the intrusion to Oscaborg, which was done earlier the morning as well. But unfortunately, Oscaborg had very new recruits, so they had never been to war. So this was very stressful for them. And Oscaborg was alerted that there was multiple ships coming their way, and that warning shots had already been fired earlier. As it was still dark, they could only vaguely see the German ships, illuminated only by floodlights. The Drøbak Narrows were further monitored by a powerful searchlight called Kantfartøy No. 2, which was a crane vessel located on the eastern side of the fjord. At around 4:15 a.m., the searchlight spotted the German ship Blucher. This ship, which was laid down in August 1936 and launched in 1937, was more than 660 feet long, 70 feet broad, and carried enough armaments to capture a port city. And the troops on this ship were the troops that would take Oslo and occupy it. And she was armored with two 53.3 centimeter torpedo launchers at the back and 4 more on the main deck. She featured 8 20.3 centimeter mounted guns, a 32-gun anti-aircraft battery, and capacity for almost 1,300 personnel. The German cruiser Blucher was brand new and Hitler's pride at that point. So now let's get to the official Battle of Drøbak Sound. The commander of the Norwegian troops, as mentioned, Oberstbürger Eriksen, was unaware of whether the ships approaching belonged to Germans or to the Allied forces. While he was aware that Norway maintained a neutral stance in the war, he was also informed that Norway was inclined to support the Allied forces if it came down to it. Aside from officers and NCOs, practically all the soldiers guarding this area were new recruits, as mentioned before, and they had only been brought to the ford 7 days prior to the Battle of Drøbak Sound. And additionally, the fortress's naval mines were not deployed on the day of the attack due to the surge in the number of inexperienced personnel in the area. As a result of these shortcomings, Oberstbürger Eriksen had no choice but to wait and allow the ships to get closer. Eriksen was also aware of Norway's pre-war neutralization rules. He was forbidden from firing at the approaching ship out of anger or haste. He instead had to fire a warning shot, but warning shots had already been fired earlier the night. The troops were very hesitant at first because Eriksen ordered them to open fire on his accord when the Blucher was around 1,000 yards from his fort. And one of them actually asked him if he was sure if they were German ships. And he most famously said, "Either I will be decorated or I will be court-martialed. Fired." And another famous quote he supposedly gave as he gave orders to fire on the Blucher was, "Damn right, we're firing live ammunition." And the first round of gunfire hit and severely damaged the tower of the ship, rendering one of the cannons unusable. The shockwave from this blast of the 2 guns, Aaron and Moses, named after biblical characters, shattered windows across town and flew 3 men off their feet. And you can imagine a few eardrums being burst from this blast as well. And after this, another gun fires, colliding with the hangar under the plane. The devastating effect of 2 heavy shells was visible. And simultaneously, firing began from Kopas and Husvik, two other forts nearby. The Husvik battery, however, had to be evacuated as the Blucher started passing it and firing upon it, and the guns and the main building went up in flames. But at least there was no casualties. In total, approximately 13 15-centimeter rounds and 30 57-millimeter shells were fired at the German cruiser as it passed through the secondary Norwegian batteries. And at some point after this, Norwegians realized that they were firing upon Germans as they began to chant Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. And it was only then they were glad they fired upon them. With the German ship being ablaze and Norwegian troops happy, morale started to rise. But the Blucher still fired back even as it went up in flames. The return fire was unsuccessful though. And at around 4:30 a.m., Commodore Captain Anderson launched the torpedoes from Oskaborg. And because he had slightly miscalculated his target speed, the first torpedo struck near the Blucher's front turret, causing relatively little damage. The aim of the second torpedo launched was rectified, and the torpedo impacted Blucher amidship, striking the same general region as the first 28-centimeter shell. This caused catastrophic damage to the Blucher, and the engines could barely pay attention. At 4:40, the commander of the heavy cruiser Lutzow, after seeing the flagship in a heavy attack and sinking, decided to take the invading forces out of range of the Oskaborg batteries. Meanwhile, Kopas and Husvik batteries also repeatedly attacked her, causing a lot of damage. And Husvik was able to quickly repair one of the guns that was just slightly damaged to continue on in the attack. And the Blucher stopped near Askelmein Island, well north and out of the field of fire of the fort's guns, to try to combat the intense flames blazing throughout the vessel, after the second torpedo strike knocked out all the engines. The Blucher's torpedoes were launched against the land to prevent them from exploding in the ship's uncontrollable fire. The crew's fight came to an end at 5:30 when flames reached a midship ammunition store for the 10.5-centimeter flak guns, blowing a massive hole in the ship's side. This fire caused the bulkheads connecting the boiler rooms to go up in flames and ripped open the cruiser's fuel bunker, causing severely more fires to break out within the cruisers. And at 6:30 a.m., there was a big explosion as a magazine flew away. A large pillar of smoke rose into the sky. At approximately 7 a.m., the Blucher tilted 45 degrees before turning upside down and finally sinking into the Norwegian water. Around 30 minutes after this, the cruiser was completely submerged. Personnel who were unable to get to the shore within 20 minutes of hitting the water were at risk of succumbing to frostbite in the icy cold fjord. And on screen we have a photo, a larger photo of the one shown previously, with two German POWs from the Blucher. In total, 1,000 German soldiers lost their lives as a result of this attack. Around 500 heavy Luftwaffe bombs were dropped onto the fort later in the day as revenge. Some of these bombs fell close to the 28-centimeter guns, and these guns were covered in rock fragments and dirt where the bombs went off. But other than that, no damage was done. By contrast, other bombs fell into the fort's building, causing excessive damage, but luckily no casualties were recorded as a result of the bombing. The events that transpired that morning prevented Oslo from being captured along with the German attack. The events that transpired the morning prevented Oslo from being captured long after the German attack started, allowing the Norwegian royal family, the members of parliament, and the cabinet members to escape to safe Britain. Additionally, Norway's gold reserve was also moved to Britain and out of the capital and sent to Britain, who was able to keep it safe for Norway to use during the duration of the war. Ultimately, unfortunately, the city of Oslo was captured later in the day by airlifted forces at the Fornebu airport. As a result of this, Eriksson decided that further battle without assistance from the government would be in vain and agreed to a ceasefire on the German troops in the evening of April 9. And on the 10th of April, the fort had surrendered the German troops. A 100-year-old fortress, manned by raw recruits and retirees, and armed with 40 to 50-year-old weapons of German and Austro-Hungarian manufacture, had destroyed a ship so new the crew was still finished training in one of the war's most unusual confrontations. Oscarborg had completed its purpose by preventing an invader from entering the capital city of Oslo.